This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Premier Qiang pledges wider market access, slams tariffs and pushes for fairer trade rules. As he says, China's economy could be worth $24 trillion by 2030. A Chinese commerce giant Shein under fire in France for selling childlike sex dolls online as it opens its first store in Paris today. Authorities widen their probe to include Temu and AliExpress. Now, Taiwan launches a sweeping crackdown on transnational scams tied to Cambodia's Prince Group, seizing nearly $150 million after U.S. sanctions on one of Asia's largest forced labor syndicates. And big technology names in Asia tank as investors pick up anxiety from the U.S. over lofty valuations of AI-related firms.
The future is in our hands.
Zoran Mamdani, New York's next mayor, is in the history books as the city's first leader who is Muslim and of South Asian descent, plus the youngest person to hold the job in more than a century. And later, Japan sends in the military as a wave of deadly bear attacks reaches record highs. Experts blaming climate-driven shifts and shrinking rural towns for the rise in incidents. Asia's #1 economy is on track to grow up to $24 trillion by 2030. Beijing is aiming an annual growth of more than 4% as part of its 5-year plan. And Premier Qiang spoke at the China International Import Expo, and he offered what he called a major market opportunity amid rising global trade restrictions. And he also called for reforms to global trade rules, saying they want to boost imports of high-quality goods.
坚持在多边主义和国际关系基本准则框架内推进国际经贸体系的改革，完善以世贸组织为核心的多边贸易体制，健全有利于大家共同发展公正、合理、透明的经贸规则。
And for more, we've got CNA senior correspondent Han Yu-Guan joining us live from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, so Premier Li using the Expo to call for reforms in global trade. Tell us, what does it tell us about Beijing's strategy amid rising trade tensions?
Well, China is clearly trying to set itself up as a responsible party in global trade. The Import Expo is China's way of showing that it is opening up its massive market. Just to give you a sense of the scale of this event, the China International Import Expo, just to walk from one end of the exhibition area to the other end, it takes a whole 20-odd minutes and about 2,000 steps just to traverse that distance. What's more, there are about 14 halls altogether, and they can, contain about 50 football fields. Just imagine that. Now, in his opening speech at the event, Chinese Premier Qiang vowed that China was committed to opening its massive markets to the world. He pointed out that China's economy is on track to exceed $24 trillion by 2030, and this represents a major market opportunity for the world amid rising trade barriers. And we can see that this Import Expo is attracting businesses from all across the globe, despite rising trade tensions between China and the US. We see the American presence here. It's the #1 in terms of area, and it's been so for 7 consecutive editions of this Import Expo. And this morning, while we were waiting for Qiang's speech, I spoke to a Singaporean executive of an American Asia-Pacific arm of an American company, Johnson Control, as well as an ambassador for a small African country, Namibia, whose population is less than 3 million. It just goes to show the range of people this Import Expo is attracting.
So that's all well and good, Yu Guan, but the critics, they have been pointing out China's widening trade surpluses, even as it invites all these extra businesses. So how do you think this plays into Beijing's projection of itself as a champion of global trade?
Well, China is trying, at least on the surface. China has announced zero tariff, if you remember, for the least developed countries of the world. And the impact is seen here at the Import Expo. The African presence, according to organizers, is up a whopping 80%. Now, today I also spoke to the chairman of AmCham Shanghai, or the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, and he noted that companies who are members of AmCham Shanghai noted efforts by the Chinese to make rules more transparent. And he says that, it is also to China's interest because China is also trying hard to prevent foreign companies from leaving China. Now, watchers do note that China is a very different market these days. It is a far more competitive market because the Chinese companies themselves are far more competitive, and China companies are investing a lot more in marketing. And therefore, watchers say foreign companies will need to accept lower margins and treat China as a long-term play. Now, unfortunately, this competitive market is made worse by the uncertain economic conditions as a result of U.S. tariffs, because this has made people here tighten their purse strings, and therefore spending by ordinary people has also gone down because of uncertain economic conditions. Otelli?
Many thanks for that report. CNA's senior correspondent Tan Yu Guan speaking to us in Shanghai. Now, e-commerce giant Shein is under investigation in France after the consumer watchdog found childlike sex dolls on the online platform. Temu, AliExpress and Wish are also being probed by French authorities. Meantime, Shein has promised to cooperate fully. The online retail giant is opening its first brick-and-mortar store in the world in Paris today. The company has 25 million customers in France and produces 900 times more products than a traditional French store. And reporting for CNA, Ross Cullen joins us live now from Paris. Ross, so tell us more about the fallout Shein is facing in France.
Hi, Telly. You're joining me outside BHV Marais, which is one of the famous department stores here in Paris. And you might be able to see a queue of people behind me. They're waiting for the opening of the Shein outlet inside BHV, the first ever bricks and mortar physical store that the Chinese e-commerce online giant will have. But it is a controversial opening. Just in the last few minutes, one man has been arrested here in France after he was the recipient of a package delivering one of these childlike sex dolls. So he has been taken into custody, and investigations by police are underway. This is the key reason why this opening of Shein is so controversial. They've faced many issues in France in the past, but particularly over the last few days, investigations started by the prosecutor here in Paris over the appearance online on Shein of adult entertainment dolls that have a childlike appearance. So as they're described here in France as pedopornographic dolls, such has been the fallout. There's been real controversy. People are asking this opening not to go ahead. The police are here in great numbers. There are obviously reporters and members of the public because Shein does have some 25 million customers here in France. So it's a popular brand, but it's facing a lot of controversy online.
Yeah, and those childlike sex dolls that I've seen, very disturbing indeed. And of course, this controversy coming as French brands, they're denouncing the arrival of the company's first ever physical store in Paris. And I can see why, because behind you, the queues are so long.
The queues are so long, and this is going to be the first of a number of openings of Shein outlets here in the French capital. A string of other famous department stores are getting ready to welcome the Chinese e-commerce brand into their physical stores because, speaking to the owner of BHV Marais, says that China is the second biggest economy in the world. It has a huge footprint when it comes to commerce, and he's trying to encourage younger people who who are particularly those who like to shop online to come into the physical store, hoping that Shein will attract them. Well, it's certainly attracting controversy, though, as well. It's faced fines in the past for, according to the French anti-fraud office, misleading consumers over its environmental record. It faces a lot of questions over how those clothes are made just so quickly and just such high volumes and then shipped on hundreds of planes that come into Europe as a whole every day from China delivering these clothes. So Shein is hoping that it will be able to get past the controversy. It said that it finds it intolerable and unacceptable that these dolls were appearing online by third parties, appearing on their site, and it has vowed to try to share the names of the people who were buying those dolls with the French police. And as we can see with the arrest today, people are continuing to purchase those childlike sex dolls, and the police are continuing to investigate. Otelli?
Many thanks for that report. Ross Cullen reporting live for CNA from Paris. Vietnam is bracing for Typhoon Kalmagi, which is expected to make landfall on Friday. Ministries across the country's coast have been asked to prepare measures as the storm draws closer. Well, the typhoon is passing through the South China Sea with gusts of up to 180 kilometers per hour. The storm is forecast to move west at around 25 kilometers per hour. The storm brought heavy rains to the Philippines, causing destructive floodwaters in the hardest hit province of Cebu. Rivers overflowed their banks, essentially forcing tens of thousands of residents to evacuate. Dozens have died, including 6 military personnel whose helicopter crashed in the southern island of Mindanao during a humanitarian mission. Residents are appealing for aid.
Ngayon, hindi pa kami nakatanggap ng tulong galing sa official ng City Hall, walang food pack, wala. Hindi kami hanap ng paraan, hindi kami makakain. Sana po may magandang puso dyan, matulungan kami. Ay, trauma kasi hindi namin alam kung saan kami uuna.
Now, one worker has died and 3 others injured after inhaling toxic gas at a plant belonging to South Korean steelmaker POSCO. The incident took place in the southeastern city of Pohang. Well, the accident occurred in the morning when subcontracted workers were exposed to an unidentified gas while preparing for equipment repairs at a production line. 4 workers received emergency treatment on site and were taken to hospital after complaining of breathing difficulties and chest pain. A worker in his 50s died on the way there. 3 others are in their 30s, sustained 1st and 2nd degree burns. The gas is believed to be either hydrogen chloride or nitric acid, but police and company officials said that further investigation is needed. Coming up next on East Asia tonight, operator behind the Hong Kong exchange posting another record-beating quarter, all thanks to robust IPO listings. Plus, a preview of one of China's most anticipated IPOs of the year, robotics unicorn Unitree. Hello again. You're watching East Asia tonight, and I've got Roland Lin standing by with the very latest in business news. And Roland, the tech sector, they just took a massive beating overnight. So then can we conclude that the AI gold rush is losing steam?
Well, investors have suddenly nervous about prices getting way ahead of themselves. The US sell-off spreading over to Asian markets today, AI stocks taking the biggest hit. Global markets have been soaring this year following the eye-watering flood of cash piling into the AI sector. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index dropping by as much as 2.3% before trimming back some of those losses. South Korean and Japanese indices also hardest hit, just having hit record highs. The Kospi Index finishing 2.9 lower, narrowing earlier losses of as much as 6.2%. Nikkei 225 also managing to pare back the plunge of 4.7 to end the day 2.5% in the red. Tech heavyweights among the biggest drag on markets. SoftBank losing some 10% in trade today, representing about $23 billion in market capitalization. The group has a broad portfolio of AI-related investments and a controlling stake in British chip designer ARM. In South Korea, memory chip giant Samsung and SK Hynix closed 4.1 and 1.2% in the red, respectively. Now, they had been the main contributors to the benchmark Kospi's recent record closings. And the world's largest contract chip maker also not spared from the risk-off sentiment. TSMC in Taipei shares ending about 3% in the red. The declines in Asian tech stocks came after shares of U.S. software company Palantir dropped by as much as 8% overnight. That's despite beating market expectations for third quarter financial results. U.S. index futures S&P 500 currently down by 0.13%, NASDAQ futures down by 0.23%. Some analysts are viewing the sharp falls in tech shares as a cause for caution, but also flag it as maybe a short-term profit-taking bid. Although others are warning that valuations of AI firms are beginning to resemble the dot-com boom of the late 90s. Further signs of easing U.S.-China tensions. Beijing says it'll suspend 24% tariffs on U.S. goods for a year, leaving the rate at 10%. It also said it would lift some tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods from next week. And that's after President Donald Trump signed an order to lower fentanyl-related tariffs on Chinese products, formalizing a key part of his deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping after their first face-to-face talks last week. Chinese benchmark indices are perking up. Shanghai Composite up 0.23, Shenzhen up 0.37. Hang Seng Index, though, flat, no thanks to that sell-off in regional tech stocks. China's services activity expanded in October, but at its slowest pace in 3 months. A decline in overseas orders offset the boost from improved domestic demand. A private survey by Rating Dog shows that China's Services Purchasing Managers Index slipped to 52.6 from 52.9 a month earlier. A reading above 50 indicates that it still remains in expansion territory. Growth in the sector was driven mainly by holiday spending during the Golden Week break last month. The latest figures mirror official data last week that also showed a pickup in activity. Jeremy Tan, CEO of Tiger Fund Management, explains why he's unsurprised by China's slight downtick in the PMI figures.
I think if you look at the overall manufacturing PMI, I think that has been consistently on the downtrend. That doesn't come as a surprise given that China is going through that deflationary cycle currently, and consumer sentiment is really actually not strong. If you look at the overall real estate markets, the unemployment figures, I think that points to a weaker consumption figure. While at the same time, I think that actually plays well into the 5-year plan that China have actually to pivot away from the investment, the infrastructure-led consumption growth into consumption. And as a result, I think that you can see that the services PMI is actually a very strong backdrop that is what China is guiding towards a more service-led economy.
Another record quarter for the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. HKEX reported a 56% jump in on-year profit for its third quarter. That's the third consecutive quarter with an all-time high driven by IPO listings and robust trading activity. The operator behind the Hong Kong Stock Exchange beat analyst estimates with a net profit of $628 million for the July to September period. That's partly thanks to strong performance in its core business, with revenue jumping 54% on year. Hong Kong is on track to set a 4-year high in public listing fundraising this year. The current amount raised so far is more than threefold the same period last year. The city had hosted the world's second biggest listing of the year, 13 Gold, during the past quarter and has close to 300 companies in the pipeline. HKEX chief Bonnie Chen attributed the performance to an inflow of share sales due to a growing investor appeal in Chinese assets. Among the most closely watched upcoming listings in Shanghai is Unitree, a robotics unicorn based in Hangzhou in eastern China. CNA's Henry Yen and industry analysts examine Unitree's planned IPO and the hype driving investor interest.
Right now, tech, especially robotics, is the hottest thing on China's stock market, and certainly Unitree is easily one of the most hyped startups in China.
If you don't read their financial reports at all, and you go to some investor gatherings, you don't have a chance to chat with people. You say, okay, we are investing in banks, we are investing in ports. They say, okay, we don't want to talk with you.
Well, media reports say Unitree is looking to raise $7 billion from its IPO on the mainland market. Just to put into perspective, CATL, which is China's battery giant, raised $4.6 billion in its Hong Kong IPO back in May. Now, get this, CATL made about $50 billion in its revenue in 2024, but Unitree only hit 1 billion renminbi mark this year, and it's roughly around $140 million.
Our Chinese President Xi Jinping has hosted a rare meeting with the country's top business leaders, including some of the biggest names in tech.
So Unitree's founder Wang Xinxin was actually one of the business leaders got to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping back in February at the Great Hall of the People, but hardly anyone in international media noticed he was there. He shot to fame after that. The 35-year-old was one of the 6 business leaders who got the chance to speak at that event. Chinese President Xi Jinping even pointed him out as the youngest in the room. Now, why does that matter? A lot of people saw it as a signal that robotics has caught the eye of China's top leader. And in China, that usually hints at where the next big wave of state support might go.
对于整个的这种科技行业来说的话，和中国经济密切相关的一些领域，我想会得到长期的各方面的全方位的这个政策以及具体措施的一些手段的这种支持，像语数啊，像这种深度探索 DeepSeek 啊等等这种真正的具有这种国际影响力、竞争力的一些企业的话，也恰恰会是这个包括金融市场、资本市场及证券市场去支持的这种对象。那么，因为它一个企业可以带动周边的整个的这种供应链的一个这样的一个体系。
Wang Xinxin has a reputation for being laser focused on driving down costs to make his robots affordable and speed up adoption. And he often talks about he would rethink the whole system down to every component to make the production cheaper. For sure, Wang Xinxin churned out a lot of cheaper robots for the China market, but people starting to question about how useful they really are beyond being fun to watch. And also, there are some concerns about a possible bubble forming in China's tech industry.
Unitree and many of the other sort of the Chinese companies has come up with very low cost but efficient design of robots. Robots on the surface is looking just as good as many of the US competitors. The more important part of the robot is the brain, right? So the robot has to be able to think and see and hear for itself. The Unitree robots actually make a very complex but agile move. So it's very eye-catching. But keep in mind that, a robot without a brain is not a substitute of human being.
They're good industries, they're good companies, they're good growth, but it's not good targets for us because everyone's looking. We're not putting much of our money into these leading technologies, basically because it's just too crowded.
Now, Japan's Toyota has revised up its profit forecast for the fiscal year, despite US tariffs taking its toll on its bottom line for the quarter ending September. Now, that's as the reduction in auto levies from 27.5% to 15% came into effect in mid-September. A quarterly revenue up more than 8% on year, but operating profit declined by more than a quarter over the same period. Toyota taking the biggest hit from the North American market, which recorded a quarterly loss of $460 million. But the worst may be behind Toyota, as the automaker recorded a 14.2% growth in sales in the US in September on year. Toyota says it's due to a resumption of production in the US as well as strong demand for its hybrid vehicles. And that's it for business for now. We'll tell you.
Thanks so very much for that, Roland. Right, coming up next on East Asia tonight, Taiwan cracks down on a massive scam ring tied to Cambodia's Prince Group, seizing nearly $150 million. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Premier Qiang says China's economy is on track to reach nearly $24 trillion by 2030, offering what he calls a major market opportunity amid growing global trade restrictions. Shein under investigation by French authorities after childlike sex dolls were found on the online platform. The investigation happening as the online giant opens its first ever physical store in Paris today. Taiwan has launched a major crackdown on transnational scam activity linked to Cambodia's Prince Group, seizing nearly $150 million in assets. Now, that operation in Taiwan follows U.S. sanctions on individuals and entities linked to the group. The move is targeting what authorities have called one of Asia's largest forced labor scam syndicates. And CNA senior correspondent Victoria Jen files this report.
Prosecutors and police fanned out across Taipei early Tuesday, conducting 47 simultaneous raids and detaining 25 suspects. They confiscated luxury apartments, supercars, and bank accounts tied to the Cambodia-based Prince Group. It's accused of laundering scam proceeds through shell companies in Taiwan. The group's leader, Chen Zhi, a China-born Cambodian tycoon, was indicted in the U.S. last month for running online investment and cryptocurrency scams. Victims were trafficked to so-called scam compounds in Cambodia, where they were forced to cheat people online under threat of physical violence. Human rights groups say such compounds have trapped tens of thousands of victims across Southeast Asia. In Taiwan, prosecutors have frozen 18 properties, among them 11 luxury apartments and 48 parking spaces in a high-end complex. Also seized are 26 high-end cars like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, along with 60 bank accounts. Altogether, the assets are worth $147 million. In addition to actions taken by Taipei and Washington, Hong Kong said on Tuesday it froze more than $350 million in cash, stocks, and funds linked to the Prince Group, while Singapore last week seized more than $115 million of the network's assets. These developments across jurisdictions are clear signs that authorities are jointly working to combat cross-border scam syndicates in an ongoing effort to dismantle the scam empire. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
Now, a Myanmar crime syndicate boss has been sentenced to death by a Chinese court for his role in operations that led to the deaths of 6 Chinese citizens. Beijing continues its crackdown on scam operations across Southeast Asia that's harming Chinese interests and nationals. Xinhua reports that Bai Suocheng, his son Bai Yingcang, and 3 close associates all received the death sentence by the Shenzhen Intermediate People's Court in Guangdong Province. Another 16 defendants working for the Bai family received criminal sentences that varies in length. The court verdict ruled that Bai and core members of his group managed large-scale fraud and gambling activities under armed protection, which ultimately led to the deaths of Chinese citizens. The verdict added that the money involved in these criminal operations exceeded $4 billion. A Malaysian director and singer Wee Meng Chi, also known as Nam Wee, has been remanded for 6 days in the murder investigation of Taiwanese influencer Iris Xie-Yusin. A 31-year-old was found dead in a Kuala Lumpur hotel room on October 22nd. And CNA senior correspondent Melissa Goh has more.
42-year-old Nam Wee has stoked many controversies in the past and has several run-ins with the police over his religiously and racially sensitive videos. Now, none has landed him in hot soup. Now, on Wednesday, Nam Wee has been remanded for possible murder of 31-year-old Taiwanese influencer Iris Xie, who was found dead 2 weeks ago in the bathroom inside a 5-star hotel room in downtown Kuala Lumpur. Now, he reportedly arrived at the Kuala Lumpur District Police Stations here in the wee hours from the southern state of Johor. He even posted on his social media outside his police station that he's willing to cooperate fully with the police to assist investigation into the death of this Taiwanese influencer. Now, in his posting, he stressed that he would not flee, adding that there were 7 instances in the past where he was caught by the authorities and he had never run away and presented himself promptly each time. Now, his lawyer, Zhou Shuotei, when met outside the Dangwangi police station, confirmed that Name Wee has been remanded.
So the police asked for 7 days remand. Of course, we oppose to the remand, saying that he shouldn't be detained because the incident happened 14 days ago. The magistrate gave 6 days. So I think that's the one thing. At this point in time, that's the only thing I can confirm.
The police have confirmed that the investigation into the influencer's death, initially classified as sudden death, is now being conducted under Section 302 of the Penal Code for murder. Now, murder is a serious and non-bailable offence that's punishable by death in Malaysia if found guilty. Name Wee, who was present with the victim at the time of the incident, has since been charged for drug-related offences after he was tested positive of synthetic drugs. Now, he's denied the charge and pleaded not guilty and released on bail. Now, 31-year-old Iris Sear, who appeared with him in several music videos in the past, her body is still at Kuala Lumpur Hospital, awaiting post-mortem, as the families reportedly have yet to arrive to claim her body. The police are conducting a comprehensive investigation that considers all possible angles surrounding her death and urge all sides not to speculate. Melissa Goh, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Japan has deployed the military to the northern region as deadly bear attacks rose to record levels this year. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's government has been scrambling to deal with the crisis as deaths have risen to 12 and injuries to more than 100 since April. Authorities in Akita requested assistance in late October after a 79-year-old woman was found dead in a forested area in what police believe was a fatal bear attack. Troops plan to use box traps to capture the animals. Experts say poor acorn harvest this year has triggered the growing bear population to come into towns to look for food, particularly in the Akita and Iwate prefectures in the north. They add that climate change-driven shifts and depopulation of rural areas are increasingly bringing people into contact with the animals.
山のふもとでも昔は畑とかそういった田んぼであったりとかそういう営みがあったんですけどもそういうところが、人口の減少とかによって、作られなくなってしまうで、耕作放棄地になってしまっているということで熊との境界が非常に近くなってしまっているというのがこれまでの推移です。
The second Manila Dialogue on the South China Sea starts today. The event brings together foreign policy experts, government officials, and academics from all over Southeast Asia. The Philippines has had frequent run-ins with China on the South China Sea. Beijing claims almost the entire waterway, ignoring a 2016 international ruling that dismissed those claims. The Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan also claim parts of the South China Sea. Regional bloc ASEAN has been pushing China to adopt a legally binding code of conduct to manage conflicts peacefully, but Beijing wants a non-binding code. Well, over the weekend, the Philippines signed a defense pact with Canada, widely seen as a response to China's growing assertiveness. The agreement mirrors similar deals Manila has signed with the US, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. There are fears that the South China Sea is becoming a flashpoint with potentially serious global consequences. Well, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, we'll get more insight on the anxieties around excess supply in oil markets. Simon Flowers, Chairman and Chief Analyst for Research House Wood Mackenzie, joins us next from the ADPEC Energy Conference in Abu Dhabi. Hello again, back with another round of business with Roland Lim. And today, or rather right now, we're looking at energy markets and generally how is the sector coping with rising geopolitical tensions following President Trump's tariff policies?
Yep, the worries about excess supply in oil markets has been casting a shadow over the sector. The group of leading oil-producing nations, that's OPEC Plus, has agreed to a smaller than expected hike in output for next month and a pause in increase for the first quarter of next year. Now, it's a decision widely seen as a move to balance its push for market share against signs of an emerging surplus. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, has long warned of a glut that is coming. In its most recent forecast, the IEA cautioned that surplus for next year could be as much as 4 million barrels per day, and that's equal to almost 4% of world demand. Some analysts say China's quiet stockpiling of reserves may be staving off a major market downturn, but the nation's push for self-reliance in the face of intense geopolitical environment is driving further uncertainty into the energy markets. As we stand right now, Brent crude is currently up 0.7%, $64.89 a barrel. U.S. market, the West Texas Intermediate is at $60.91. Now, to help us make sense of it all, Simon Flowers, Chairman and Chief Analyst for Research House Wood Mackenzie, joins us from Abu Dhabi on the sidelines of the Energy Summit, ADIPEC 2025, where Woodmac is actually ADIPEC's knowledge partner. Simon, good to have you on the show. Now, oil demand expected to stay above 100 million barrels a day even after 2040. But AI, data centers, that's straining the power grids. What does your model show us about oil demand in 2026? And how crucial is that for Asia in its outlook?
Well, good to be with you, Roland. And Luke, thanks for the question. The near term looks a bit rocky in the oil markets, but actually we're pretty bullish going out through the back end of this decade and into the 2030s, and we can talk about that later on. Your question's about what's happening in the near term, and it's going to be a difficult time because on the one hand we've got quite weak demand. I say that because at the beginning of this year we thought it might be a 1.5 million barrels per day growth. It's now looking about half that, and a lot of that is to do with just slow economic growth, but also the tariffs. And of course, as you said, we've got a lot of supply off the market that OPEC Plus is trying to get back on. So they have a fearfully difficult job trying to navigate that and make sure that the market isn't in excess. I'd say that the bears will be a little bit disappointed in this. We are no means out of the woods yet. This risk of glut is going to last well into 2026 and maybe a little bit beyond until we see stronger demand recovery. But we wonder if there are hidden pockets of demand, maybe in Asia itself, that are soaking up demand. It may be inventory, it may be real demand. But actually, at the moment, the price is looking good, somewhat supported by geopolitical risk as well.
Okay. Woodmac also warning power demand is surging as the net zero gap widens. Where in Asia Pacific will, say, AI and data center growth hit the hardest first?
Well, hit the hardest. Look, everywhere is trying to build data centers and get in on the AI gig. It's most evident for fairly obvious reason in the USA. But all countries want to have data security and they want to be part of this thing. And it ripples out from just building the data centers into power demand. But look, there are pockets. China is also a leader in this, building out data centers rapidly. You don't notice it quite so obviously because maybe less information available, but also because they have electricity growing anywhere. But somewhere like the US, which is not used to strong demand pool for electricity, is going to suffer real challenges in getting the supply out to the market. And when we look around the rest of Asia, whether it's Malaysia or Australia or other parts of Southeast Asia, we're just beginning to see that demand pool emerge. And I think it's going to intensify through the rest of this decade. So just watch out for it. It's a new element that's arisen in power markets, and it's a challenge for all electricity industries, whichever country.
Now, at the same time, China's factories has slowed quite a bit in October, but it is staying in growth mode. How does that affect your outlook for oil demand and refinery margins in Asia?
Well, look, of course, we take it into account, and it's no great surprise. I mean, the whole world is really suffering through a difficult economic period, but we're pleased to say that we don't think that the impact of the US tariffs, which affected China as well as virtually every country around the world, it's not going to lead the world into recession. So that's one positive. And yes, the most recent figures from China are a little bit soggy, but it's still a key part of the oil demand growth that we see over the next few years at a subdued rate, 0.7 million barrels a day this year, something similar next and the year after, before China's demand growth starts to peter out, a function not so much of factories, but of electric vehicles starting to penetrate. So we're watching China very closely. I don't think it's going to pick up materially from here, but we should still see some growth in China this year and next year.
And of course, U.S. sanctions on Rosneft, Luke Oil, shaking up the crude flows. How do you see the price gap between Russian crude Ural as well as Brent evolving going forward, say the next 6 months?
I think it's likely to widen. What's difficult to tell is how much of the 3.5 million barrels per day of crude coming from Rosneft and Luke Oil will make its way onto the market. It's going to be more difficult for them to sell it to the customers who've been buying it, China and India, just because of these US dollar sanctions. But Russia has proved very adept at getting its oil out into the wider market. That they've suffered a big discount of anything up to $10 a barrel, sometimes even more. And I would expect if they want to monetize that crude, the gap is likely to widen in the coming months.
Okay. And you're at ADIPEC, of course. If you had one big takeaway from ADIPEC that could spark energy investments into Asia next year, what would it be?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to give you two. One is that AI is a massive theme. We've already touched upon that, and it's happening everywhere. And it's finding that intersection between AI and energy, and a lot of it is to do with finding 24/7 power demand. The second thing, and there's a great deal of vibrancy about oil and gas here again, after maybe a subdued 5 years before this. And that's a signal for IOCs and NOCs to start to look for the opportunities in upstream oil and gas to develop new reserves to support their portfolios into the 2030s, when we expect oil and gas demand to be resilient. And Southeast Asia in particular has enjoyed something of a renaissance of upstream with some big discoveries in Indonesia and Malaysia. So I think it's going to be a good few years for Asian upstream oil and gas.
Simon, appreciate those insights. That was Simon Flowers, Chairman and Chief Analyst for Wood Mackenzie. And it's back to you, Telly.
Thanks so much, Roland. Well, Beijing's sister city and America's biggest has elected its youngest, first Muslim and South Asian mayor. In his victory speech, Zoran Mamdani told New Yorkers that it is time to usher in a new era of leadership.
New York City, breathe this moment in. We have held our breath for longer than we know. We have held it in anticipation of defeat, held it because the air has been knocked out of our lungs too many times to count, held it because we cannot afford to exhale. Thanks to all of those who sacrificed so much, we are breathing in the air of a city that has been reborn. Donald Trump, since I know you're watching, I have 4 words for you. Turn the volume up.
Throughout the speech, the self-described democratic socialist did not hold back against the U.S. president, who had threatened to cut federal funding in the event of a Mamdani victory.
Tonight, against all odds, we have grasped it. The future is in our hands.
Mr. Mamdani defeated former Governor Andrew Cuomo and Republican Curtis Sliwa. Some analysts are now waiting to see how the mayor-elect will deliver what they call his unrealistic promises. His campaign has been largely based on free buses, universal childcare, and tackling rising rent prices. And Mr. Mamdani was not the only victorious Democrat. In New Jersey, Mickey Sherrill beat former state lawmaker Jack Ciattarelli in a race that focused on affordability issues. She is the state's first female Democratic governor. Virginia is also getting its first female governor. Abigail Spanberger took the win over Republican candidate Winsome Earl Sears. Over in California, voters approved a plan to redraw congressional districts, giving Democrats a boost ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom hailed the victory and thanked voters for supporting the initiative.
We stood tall and we stood firm in response to Donald Trump's recklessness. And tonight, after poking the bear, this bear roared with an unprecedented turnout in a special election with an extraordinary result.
Mitch McCann, who's covering the story for CNA, touched on what overall impact the polls will have on next year's midterms.
Interesting. Tonight we've seen victories in Virginia and New Jersey for governors there. The Democrats have won, and they've also won in New York. So 3 big wins for the Democrats tonight. And as I mentioned, they are very much a bruised party after the 2024 election. Of course, Kamala Harris in that presidential election, although she only ran for 107 days, the Democrats did lose every swing state in that election, and they've been trying to find themselves and find leadership since then. So this really energizes the Democrats heading into the next midterm elections next year. Although I will caveat that situation by saying these are states that may have gone to the Democrats. It's not a huge surprise. They are not Republican states like Texas or North Dakota or Alabama. But regardless, it is a big win and a big confidence booster for the Democrats heading into the next year.
Well, for more on the U.S. off-year elections and the new New York City mayor-elect, you can always head to our website, cna.asia, where you can find out more about Zoran Mamdani and his meteoric rise to power. In other news, Chinese officials have delayed the return mission to bring back a group of astronauts from the Tiangong space station. The spacecraft slated to carry the Shenzhou 20 mission is believed to have been struck by small debris. The 3 astronauts flew to the space station in April and were finishing their 6-month rotation. Now, their replacements on the Shenzhou 21 mission successfully docked onto the space station on Saturday. The delay highlights the danger to space travel posed by increasing amounts of space debris. The debris consists of discarded launch vehicles or parts of a spacecraft that float around in space, risking collisions with countries' active space assets. But perhaps it's not all bad news. The crew has been gifted a hot air oven that they use to barbecue meat in orbit. It took 28 minutes to grill the chicken wings, and it did look pretty good. Now, the hot air oven is a major step forward in the basic living habits of the astronauts, who have previously relied on pre-packed rations. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.